Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world. So much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing marvellously well. And I'm doing fabulous, thank you, and looking so forward to spending some quality time with you listening to a story, because as the days get colder, it's always so lovely to just get a lovely hot drink and to listen to a lovely story. And I've got one for you tonight. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, the rain came pelting down vigorously in large torrents. Transfixed, I watched it gliding down the window panes, covering the glass and spatters of opaque droplets. I could hear the swishing sound of the water gushing down the drain pipes, the distant rumbles of thunder. My uncle's golden retriever Carmel, undaunted by the growling bellicose smoky grey gloomy sky, was lying blissfully fast asleep on the flagstone floor of the very large, stylic, rustic-looking kitchen, with its bright red kitchen range, zooty kitchen cupboards, and golden-brown bespeckled granite islands. Not to mention the pièce de résistance, a huge wooden oak table, where I was now sitting. Carmel's long, soft, luxurious, creamy hair brushed against my feet, as a low snore emerged from the back of his throat. Everything in the yard was luxuriously green, the raindrops saturating the earth, causing even the turf to twinkle. It looked as if someone had turned on a power hose, washed all the dust away, for the plants and flowers looked brighter, crisper, greener, fresher, more vibrant from this rain. The clusters of spring daffodils were bowing their flowery heads, subserviently under the weight of the raindrops, while some of the beds of pansies looked like they'd taken a stiff beating. But once the sun burst through the cobalt blue sky, and the grey sky finally receded, those flowers would look brighter, fresher than ever. I enjoyed staying at my uncle's Colorado ranch-style farmhouse, situated unapologetically in the midst of the glorious countryside, not too far away from a town, so in short a perfect location. Yet for me it was the indispensable consummate escapism that I was so desperately seeking, a true break from the chaotic chaos of my everyday life that seemed to swallow, devour, consume me with the gusto of a Californian wildfire. I deplored my job, a whole world away from the spectacular Colorado ranch, in the city of Boston, with a fervent passion, working for a demanding boss, as his personal secretary, who insisted on meeting last-minute deadlines, even if it meant quite literally that I was tearing my hair out in frustration. It would seem the daunting, all-consuming, unabating workload never seemed to stop piling up like the dirty sports gear in a very active footballer's laundry basket. There were times I had felt so weighted down, encumbered, overwhelmed by the work, that I had secret fantasies of just marching into my boss's office with a feisty swagger, just throwing the files on his desk and saying, "Sorry, Mr. Falconer, but I've just had enough. You can stuff your job, put it where the sun doesn't shine." I could visualize the pain expression on his face as I stomped belligerently out of the offices, with everyone in the open space area gawking at me in horror, as if to say, "What the hell was all that about?" as I finally left the building for good, never ever to return. The reality was very different. As much as I despised my nondescript mediocre job, I knew I needed it. The pay was excellent. If I gave it up to embrace pastures new, I might not be able to afford to maintain my high standard of living that I had grown accustomed to over the years. But being miserable, depressed, permanently exhausted had become a fixture and fitting in my life. Of course, everyone on the outside looking in at my life, through the dewy, fragrant, beguiling sham of rose-tinted glass windows, clearly admired my lavish, sumptuous, luxurious lifestyle, falsely assuming that I had it all. The entire world at my feet. For on its elusive, enticing surface, it would certainly seem that way. But then, on the surface, appearances can be exceedingly deceptive. A disingenuous, perfidious deception that you can never take at its word, or even at a fleeting glance. For not all that you see with your naked eye, or gleam on social media, is in fact as it seems. The envious looks on the faces of my friends had not escaped me, Even when I drove my glamorous British racing green Jaguar down the streets of Boston, I knew that my image looked good. But that was all it was, image. As King Solomon rightly proclaimed, it was all meaningless under the sun. I could see admiring glances from people who clearly thought I was an affluent businesswoman who had absolutely everything. How wrong they were, how misguided, how misinformed. Sometimes I felt so empty, as if everything had been sucked out of me, like I was a dried-out old empty shell, robotically going through the motions of my life with a mechanical efficiency. In truth, a robot would have done a much better job than I'd done. In reality, I was no more than a pathetic, glorified secretary with a fancy name, assistant director, that looked the part of a successful business executive in my smart, well-fitting Prada suits and stylish pumps. I was being paid a lot to perform like a hamster on a wheel, going round and round and round and round every day, with the same boring, drudgerous routines that made my whirling head want to explode with frustration. Worse still, both my parents loved to gloat on my account, on my so-called success. They hungrily basked in it like a pair of gluttonous Komodo dragons, shamelessly boasting about my insipid accomplishments, which were in truth as colourless as water, as bland as unsalted, flavourless popcorn. "Oh, meet my daughter," my effusive mother would gush to her listening audience, when I was at affluent social gatherings with them, like cocktail parties or barbecues. "This is my oldest daughter, Felicia. She works for the top CEO at PricewaterhouseCoopers in Seaport Boulevard." I could see my mother's chest inflate and swell with pride as she made those gainful innuendos. I would literally squirm with embarrassment, wishing that the whole ground would swallow me whole, as my mother would bumptiously brag on and on, like a washing machine at a laundromat, about my long list of masterful accomplishments that I myself did not know I'd achieved. For it would seem my mother's exaggerating tongue had run away with her, and seriously lengthened my success like the string on a piece of chewing gum that went on and on and on forever until it disappeared into the ether. The only person that I could genuinely talk to when it came to my crumbling, dilapidated life was my cousin Cynthia. She seemed to get it. She was a country girl who lived on her father's Californian cattle ranch and would often come to Boston to stay with my mother's older sister Gretchen, who also lived there. I met up with her in town at a really trendy coffee shop 4 weeks prior, after she just came back from an exciting trip to Africa, where she had visited the Serengeti, lounged on some of Kenya's most illustrious beaches. I'd noticed that she was positively glowing from her holiday as her skin gleamed with a natural golden tan. Her demeanour was relaxed and carefree, like the wind on a sandy beach. "Oh, there you are," she had said, rushing over enthusiastically to embrace me with a warm, energetic hug, as she threw off her overcoat on the back of the chair to sit down. She stared at me through concerned brown eyes. "You don't look good, Felicia. You're so pale and gaunt-looking. Are you sure you're all right?" "It's the work," I sighed, shrugging my shoulders in a nonchalant way. "It gets on top of me at times." All of a sudden I started to cry. This was a turn-up for the books. Even I was shocked by the sudden, unexpected emotional outburst, as rivers of tears bounded down my face at an alarming pace. It was very humiliating. Cynthia quickly opened her purse to grab some tissues for me to blot my eyes. I could hear the soft murmur of the people's voices rising and falling in the background, the sound of cutlery and china clanging, tinkling, clinking, along with the scuttle of the rushed feet of the waitresses as they hastily hurried across the cafe floor to take the detailed orders from the hungry people with an impressive efficiency. "There," she said, "there you are. Your mascara's running all over the place." She dampened the tissue with her tongue, wiping away the clouds of black that had now dappled my cheeks in a contemporary design of smoky blotches and splashes that might have looked good on an artist's canvas, but not my face. "Things can't be that bad, surely." "I hate my job, Cynthia," I said to her, almost growling. "I bloody hate it. If you must know, I keep dreaming of throwing the entire filing cabinet at Mr. Falconer, telling him to go and suck eggs. I wish I could leave that god-awful job. I feel as if I'm trapped under a falling building, like I'm suffocating from the claustrophobic oppression, that I can't breathe. I just want to scream, scream and scream. I feel so overwhelmed. The pressure of meeting all these deadlines, it's immense. It's stressing me out, seriously." You poor thing, said Cynthia, telling the waitress to bring me a tall glass of Mountain Dew as quickly as possible. Your mother's always going on to my mother about your dazzling achievements, how terribly proud she is that you work for such an illustrious company like PricewaterhouseCoopers in such a prominent high-profile position, driving around in your fancy Jag, wearing designer clothes, owning an apartment on the harbour. She seems to think you love your job, and that you're a huge, huge success. Success, I sniggered, as if the word was odious and vile. I wanted to spit it out like a bitter piece of fruit. You know my mother is so pretentious. It's absolutely pathetic. The truth is, Cynthia, anyone could do my job. Absolutely anyone. It's that mediocre, that uninspiring. I hate it. I actually hate it. In fact, hate is an injustice to the word. I despise it. I loathe it. Once again I surprised myself with more unexpected streams of tears washing down my face that completely obliterated my makeup, leaving my now mottled skin covered in ugly pink wheals. But this time many people in the coffee shop were glancing awkwardly in my direction, pretending not to look, but not being desperately discreet enough to conceal their curiosity. They were staring at me with concerned expressions on their faces, as after all, why would anyone wearing a Prada suit, Prada pumps, and a matching Prada purse have anything to be sad about at all? Is she going to be all right? The waitress asked Cynthia. Maybe a piece of chocolate cake would do the trick. Chocolate is great for grief. Good idea, said Cynthia. In that case, bring her the biggest piece of chocolate cake you've got. It would seem the waitress took my cousin literally at her word, for a slice of cake the size of a family pizza was placed in front of me, that caused a few eyebrows in the neighbouring tables to be raised. I even heard one woman saying, "Is she really going to eat all that?" Even I had to smile to myself as I stared down at the monstrosity before me, a very nice-looking one, with layers of fudge icing, whipped cream, copious, fat, juicy cherries marinated in brandy. I took a bite. I felt infinitely better about the world, as the sweet, lofty richness of the cake seemed to calm down my frazzled nerves. "You know what you need," said Cynthia, looking at me earnestly. "You need a good holiday, a break from your life in Boston. You're probably right, but my job is so busy. I can't take time off. Mr. Falconer really needs me." "That is so ridiculous," said Cynthia, growing heated as her angry face became flushed with a bright pink hue. "You're going to take time off. You hear me? You need a break from your job for your own good. If you carry on this way, you're going to have a nervous breakdown. I can't sit back and watch that happen to you. I tell you what, in 4 weeks' time our family is going abroad for 3 weeks. Why don't you move into our ranch house in Colorado? No one will disturb you. The ranch hands are in full control of running the ranch. They take care of the cattle, manning the affairs of the farm. Our ranch house is in a private space away from the working ranch, so you can stay there with Carmiel, our golden retriever, and our 2 cats for company. You'll have your own space, be able to go out for country walks, do your own thing. No one will disturb you. You need this time to be with yourself. It's very important." "It sounds like a great idea," I said, "but—" "No buts," said Cynthia, grabbing my hands. "Do you listen to me? No buts. You'll be house-sitting Carmiel, along with our 2 lackadaisical cats, but at the same time you'll have time to reflect on your life, so that when you return to Boston you can then decide whether you want to continue working for Mr. Falconer. I promise you, with some fresh air, gentle exercise, time to be quiet with yourself, you'll soon be able to decide what is best for you. In your current emotional state, your thoughts are flying all over the place like a dodgy electric connection that's firing up all wrong. You need some serious grounding, girl. Nature can do that for you, give you some meaningful perspective." Fast forward 4 weeks, and I had agreed to my cousin Cynthia's preposterous proposal that had not been so preposterous after all. On the contrary, a week into my holiday, I was beginning to really feel the benefits of being able to relax, to drink in the ravishing scenery that surrounded my uncle's home. It was wonderful to wake up, potter around the kitchen casually in my slippers, to stroke Carmiel's soft hair, get caught up with reading a novel or 2 on the sun lounger, take the occasional stroll in the woodgrove that framed the right-hand side of the house. Cynthia had been right. The ranch hands had given me a wide girth, left me to my own devices, were managing the ranch superbly without even a fleeting glance from me. It would appear my uncle's stunning ranch-style home, fringed by a magnificent woodgrove, along with Carmiel, the adorable, loving golden retriever, that made me feel comfortable, secure and protected were my sanctuary for the next 3 weeks. There were a couple of old cats that mooched on the sofa all day long that were also good company for me, as they enjoyed rolling on their backs while I massaged their soft, fluffy underbellies, purring like little car engines. Let me assure you that a spot of laziness is very good for the soul. I was lapping it up hungrily, like a sea sponge, as I had not felt this free for a long time. I felt as if the weight of the world had been lifted from my shoulders, and that my hectic working life at PricewaterhouseCoopers was a distant, faint, obscure memory on the horizon. Unfortunately, Cynthia wasn't able to go abroad with her parents after all, as after her trip to Africa she had contracted hepatitis. She was convalescing with her Aunt Gretchen in Boston, was subsequently in quarantine. I did wonder if I might have been subjected to the virus, as after all I was up close and personal with her in that coffee shop, but so far I didn't have any physical symptoms to suggest that I could have caught it, although I had noticed that I was avoiding eating anything rich, as any fatty food brought on feelings of nausea, while my nose-diving appetite had seriously diminished. But I just shrugged my shoulders, putting those absurd, incongruous anomalies down to a change of season and environment. Gretchen had informed me that Cynthia had been placed on a non-fat diet for her liver, was not allowed to drink any alcohol whatsoever, and had also lost a ton of weight from the hepatitis, but she was doing exceedingly well. The doctor had assured her of an excellent full recovery. I continued to watch the rain as I leaned down to stroke the sleeping dog at my feet. Carmiel was a devoted golden retriever that was getting on in years, but he loved lounging around people. Over the last week the two of us had grown very close. "We'll go for a walk just now," I assured him, "once the rain has abated." At the word walk, Carmiel raised his head from his sleeping position to look at me devotedly through brown eager eyes, while his long blonde tail thumped on the floor. It was spring in Colorado, a truly mesmerizing time of the year. I was watching the world before my eyes transform into an artist's palette of pretty spring colours, especially observed in the pink blossoms of the crabapple trees that were illustriously crowned in an ocean of ethereal petals. "Are you coming?" I called out to Carmiel, who raced eagerly towards me, out from under the canopy of the oak table, to make his place firmly at my side. I opened and closed the front door behind me, as I clicked it in the lock, while I placed the key under the doormat. We eagerly ambled towards the wood grove that consisted of tall, statuesque ponderosa pines and spruce trees that penciled into the sky like vertical Christmas trees. After the rain, the forest smelt incredible, with the smell of earth mixed with the fragrant infusion of the sweet butterscotch-like scents of the ponderosa pines. The forest floor was strewn with glorious-looking lacy ferns, flowering shrubs, the occasional fallen tree trunk that looked like sculptural benches, swathed in carpets of luxurious, rich, velvety green moss. I could hear the tweets of the birds, observed the occasional squirrel with curious brown eyes darting up a tree trunk. All of a sudden I became dithery, confused, vague, disorientated. The only way I can describe the strange, outlandish feeling is when you've become inebriated. You've lost your mental and physical orientation. It was as if the forest had become like a rocking boat, and I could see that I had lost my stability. Everything was swaying backwards and forwards. Even the trees in the forest became a whirl of colourful dots. I knew something was wrong. What was happening to me? I could feel the sweat breaking out on my forehead, and after that I remembered nothing. I imagine I must have passed out, lost consciousness, collapsed on the forest floor. It felt as if I was locked in some weird dream from which I was trying to awaken, as I drifted in and out of consciousness. I vaguely remember sensing my environment. It seemed strange, but the sight of Carmiel lying by my side, licking my hand, was very reassuring, very comforting. Through my sleeping eyes I opened them slightly to see that I was lying on the scratchy straw inside a homespun-looking shelter made of broken timber and the boughs of a ponderosa pine tree. I could see the familiar needles laced between the trunks that created a large, fragrant canopy over my head that was sheltered from the outside elements, as the floor in this shelter was completely bone dry. I could hear the reassuring pitter-patter of the rain thrashing down outside, but I wasn't uncomfortable by any manner of means, as wrapped up in the cosy confines of this peculiar sheltered nest was strangely snug. Yet I knew I wasn't dreaming. But what on earth was I doing in this bizarre, idiosyncratic place? Where on earth was I? That was when I saw her. I knew at once she was a Bigfoot, Although having lived in Boston all my life, people have put down such anomalous, fictitious creatures as being just stuff of legends. For a university town like Boston, you naturally get those studious academic types, so caught up in their silken, silvery spiderwebs, comprised of the building blocks of intelligent, rational thought and reason, that is so clouded, veiled by their judicious ability to see beyond scientific fact and reason. For these people, the very notion of a Bigfoot existing isn't remotely fathomable, but they were wrong, because the creature that had taken me into the shelter was a Bigfoot without question. With my soaring high temperatures, I was a little delirious, so focusing on her was wrought with its challenges. At first she seemed like a massive fuzzy blur of black hair, but as my eyes acclimatized to this moving, obscure humanoid silhouette that seemed to be fussing around me like a frenzied bee, I could see her shape more clearly. She was tall, imposing, lanky, powerfully built, with overlong arms, a pyramid-shaped head, and a small pair of pert breasts. It was her kind, gentle, feminine face that seized my attention. It was so uncannily human, with a leathery grey skin, deeply furrowed forehead, and deep-set dark brown eyes that seemed intelligent and very earnest. I think it was very significant that Carmia was completely comfortable in her presence, unfazed, undaunted, unintimidated by the creature. On the contrary, as she drifted in and out of the wooded shelter, Carmia seemed to follow her around like a besotted puppy dog. In my sleep I often discerned happy woofs, along with a chattering sound, as if the creature was talking affectionately to the dog, as if in some way they had developed an unlikely attachment together. I think the Bigfoot was bewildered to see my eyes flickering open and focusing directly on her. She came towards me, and I could feel the fragrant smell of mulched ponderosa pine leaves being rubbed on my forehead. They smelt fragrant and were strangely cooling. It felt like a pleasant treatment in a beauty salon. I've since learnt that pine is so good for fevers and inflammation when applied topically. I don't know how long I was with this creature, as sometimes I would feel my lips being saturated by water which she poured into my mouth, or I would taste the rich sweetness of a crushed berry on my tongue, which I would always gratefully swallow. There was a time that 3 shadowy Bigfoot creatures stood around me like 3 burly tree trunks, studying me with concerned expressions on their faces. I remember them having a conversation about me, but it's all so vague, indeterminate, blurred in my memory. I could hear them talking backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, and backwards and forwards in an audible indigenous language, but the voices were muffled, indistinct, and I was caught up in my feverish state, where I drifted in and out of my dreams, only sometimes glancing into reality for a second when my fever plummeted. But despite everything, I just knew I was safe. I could feel those eccentric creatures taking care of me. I remember the largest Bigfoot almost seemed like a medicine man. He placed a stone in my hands which felt cold to the touch, like a rose quartz, along with a necklace of eagle's feathers around my neck. I know that because my hand would touch them and I could feel they were feathers. While all these creatures stood around me, placing their hands on me like a Reiki healing session, I do remember experiencing an idiomatic rush of warm energy pulsing through my body. The following day, after the queer, rather absurd ritual, I was lifted out of my feverish state quite miraculously, glancing down at myself to see that I was covered in a deer pelt. I looked up to see Carmel by my side, her twinkling, devoted, loving brown eyes focusing on me intently, while her tail wagged profusely, thrashing the ground exuberantly. When she saw I had awoken, she darted out of the timber tent and began to bark excitedly, as if to alert the Bigfoot to my astonishing recovery. As if on cue, the Bigfoot came rushing into the nest, with Carmel by her side, a set of bright, sparkling brown eyes fixed excitedly upon me. She darted over me to feel my head. I think my fever had subsided, because I suddenly felt a whole lot better. I realized I was hungry. Then the Bigfoot brought me some honey and berries, and I began to eat. She said a few words to me that I didn't understand, but I knew they were kind and gentle. I got up and the Bigfoot walked by my side as I made my way back to the ranch, staggering a little uneasily on my feet, but the Bigfoot held me up as I walked. She watched me as I opened the front door with Carmel by my side. Then she nodded and simply glided away. Imagine my surprise to realize a whole week had gone by where I'd been nursed by a Bigfoot, for when I checked my calendar it had been a Thursday. Now it was the Friday of the following week. It would seem the ranch hands who had left me alone to my own devices had been blindly oblivious to my absence on the ranch. It was clear that Carmiel had been fed by the female Bigfoot, because when I gave her a bowl of kibble, she looked very disheartened, as if to say, "Where is the prime steak?" As for the two fat cats, they were lying across the couch. I noticed carcasses of a few half-eaten mice lying around the place, so they too had managed to take care of themselves while I was indisposed. It was when I discovered that my skin had grown bright yellow, that my urine was the colour of Coca-Cola, that I realised that I did indeed have yellow jaundice, or hepatitis if you like. I'd obviously caught it from my cousin Cynthia at the coffee shop, but even though I was infectious, I was feeling a whole lot better, and was placed in quarantine for a couple of weeks, where I remained in isolation on the ranch. It would seem every time I went for a walk in the woods, Carmiel would start barking loudly. The gentle Bigfoot would reappear. She would come out of the bushes from nowhere, rushing excitedly towards the dog, cradling Carmiel lovingly in her arms, rubbing her face in his coat. I realised that during my sickness, Carmiel and this unlikely creature had certainly formed an incredible bond. The Bigfoot looked at me. Our eyes met. She was so lovely. Her eyes twinkled with pleasure as she studied me. She seemed so happy to see that I was better. She pointed to me and let out a few happy whoops, along with words in a language I didn't understand. I decided that I needed to thank the creature for her extreme kindness towards me, so I ordered some groceries from town, took them into the forest for the Bigfoot in a large box, as I knew this creature had saved my life. For if I'd been lying in the forest unconscious, there is no telling what could have happened to me. I could have been drowned by the rain, attacked by a mountain lion, or eaten by some hungry coyotes. On the day that I'd brought the box of goodies for the Bigfoot in the woods, as I'd expected, Carmiel began to bark and bark to get her attention. And there she was, emerging through the trees, her lofty body, so graceful, so elegant, as she moved towards us as though she was floating. I put the box in front of her, indicated that it was for her. At first she seemed bashful, resistant, shy, reluctant. She moved cautiously towards the box, as if worried that it might actually bite her. She opened it up warily and began to sniff at the different packages, tossing them up in her hand like tennis balls, and then opening some of the cellophane containers, sampling some of the offerings. She pulled out the package of dried fruits, the nuts, the bottles of honey, peanut butter, jelly, cookies, and a vast selection of flavoured popcorns and chips. The creature was so enthused, she began to whoop jubilantly, jumping up and down on her legs like an exuberant puppy dog. She opened the honey and cinnamon popcorn, popping it into her mouth, crunching it happily, and making appreciative, ecstatic ah sounds. And then she picked up the box and glided away. The first day I returned to work at the offices in Boston for Mr. Falconer, it really was unpleasant to be back. Within the first week, the files were once again piling up, and once again I was swamped with work. I returned home, glanced around my flat, and although swathed in exquisite decor, it had lost its lustrous shine. The next day while I was at work, I suddenly decided that I'd had enough. I walked into Mr. Falconer's office, placing the files on his desk. "I can't do this any more," I told him. "I've had enough. I quit." Mr. Falconer looked up at me in astonishment. "I don't understand," he quivered. "You've everything, a top job, an excellent salary. Why would you throw it all away like this?" "Because, Mr. Falconer," I said, "you'll be surprised to know that there are some things in life far more valuable than a hefty pay package. My happiness is worth a hell of a lot more than your pathetic job. I'm glad to inform you that I found a fabulous job working in an art gallery, which I enjoyed so much. Granted, I wasn't being paid the kind of salary as before, so my Jaguar and harbourfront property were gone, but so was the turmoil, the distress of my job. I realised my happiness was so much more valuable than any stuffy job could ever be. As you can imagine, my mother wasn't desperately enamoured by my falling off the pedestal of my so-called prominent, prestigious career. So I had to put up with her hangdog expression for a while, but I certainly didn't care. I never told anyone about the week on a cattle ranch that I'd spent in a Bigfoot's nest. There would be too much, I can assure you, for people to get their heads around here, especially in a university town like Boston that would think such an outrageous claim was nonsensical and ridiculous. I was informed that for 3 weeks after I'd left the ranch, Carmiel kept visiting the woodgrove until she died. No prizes for guessing who she was visiting. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye. and good night.